Now to what may be the single most important geopolitical story in the world. It's not Ukraine, and not many in the media seem to be talking about it. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says China is getting more aggressive and could be planning to invade Taiwan soon, and by force if necessary. Blinken's comments came at the end of a forum yesterday at Stanford with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice.
There has been a change in the approach from Beijing toward Taiwan in recent years. And instead of sticking with the status quo that was established in a positive way, a fundamental decision that the status quo is no longer acceptable, and that Beijing was determined to pursue reunification on a much faster timeline, and if peaceful means didn't work, then it would employ coercive means, and possibly, if coercive means don't work, maybe forceful means to achieve its objectives. And that is what is profoundly disrupting the status quo and creating tremendous tensions.
So what does that mean for the U.S.? This all comes during the Chinese Communist Party Congress that opened Sunday, with President Xi Jinping saying, "Resolving the Taiwan issue is a matter for the Chinese, a matter that must be resolved by us, Chinese people. We will continue to strive for a peaceful reunification with the greatest sincerity and the utmost effort, but we will never promise to renounce the use of force, and we will reserve the option of taking all measures necessary." Here's why this is such a potentially dangerous issue. Just last month, President Biden said the U.S. would use military force if China attacked Taiwan.
Would U.S. forces defend the island?
Yes, if in fact there was an unprecedented attack.
So unlike Ukraine, to be clear, sir, U.S. forces, U.S. men and women, would defend Taiwan in the event of a Chinese invasion?
Yes.
White House officials walked back the president's comments 2 days later.
He was asked a question, a hypothetical question in this interview. We continue to stand behind the one China policy. We continue to stand against unilateral changes to the status quo, and we continue to stand for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The president has reiterated those basic commitments on every occasion that he's talked about Taiwan, including in this interview.
Now, tensions have been rising between the U.S. and China after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi led a congressional delegation to Taiwan in August. In response, China conducted military drills near the island in the days after the visit. China has not publicly criticized Russia's invasion of Ukraine, leading many in Taiwan to fear that could embolden China to invade. So what happens if they move forward with this? Joining me now is Bradley Bowman, former National Security Advisor to the U.S. Senate, now focuses on China policy as the Senior Director at the bipartisan think tank Defense of Democracies. Thanks so much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. Am I overstating how important this is?
Thanks for the opportunity. My short answer is no, I don't think you are at all. I think America has democratic principles at stake in Taiwan and core national and economic security interests. Democratic principles, what do I mean by that? I think when you have an authoritarian bully trying to squelch freedom or end freedom, that America is and should be interested. Our core democratic principles are at stake, whether that's in Ukraine or Taiwan. And I think we also have core economic interests there. Taiwan is a leading producer of semiconductors. A lot of important maritime traffic goes through the Taiwan Strait. And if Beijing were successful in conquering Taiwan, America's ability to protect its core interest in that part of the world, and including along the first island chain, would be much, much weaker. And I think many would have to conclude that America is a weakened and less credible power, and you'd see a lot of nations deciding that they need to bandwagon with China rather than maintain their independence or side with the United States.
So, but what is the U.S.'s option? I mean, so they move forward. They make a decision they're going to attack, try and conquer Taiwan. The U.S. sends the U.S. military in to
right.
a war with China?
Yes. So the longstanding U.S. policy, as codified in the Taiwan Relations Act, is that we think this conflict should be resolved peacefully, and that force should not be used. And up until recent years, that there really hasn't been an option for Beijing because the U.S. military has been so powerful. But over time, the U.S. military balance has eroded. We don't have the supremacy that we used to have. In two successive reports to Congress, Indo-Pacific Command, the top command in that region, reported to Congress that the balance of power is eroded. And so the reason why Beijing does not control Taiwan today, in short, is American military power. And that balance of power is eroded. And so they can start to contemplate achieving their political objectives for force. And so if Beijing believes that either we can't or we won't intervene, then they're more likely to do it. But you're exactly right. If our deterrence is weak and they roll the dice in Taiwan the way Putin rolled them in Ukraine, then we would have a choice. If we intervene, we're at war with China. That's a big deal, no doubt. If we don't intervene, then 23 million people in Taiwan lose their freedom, and American prestige and credibility, I would say, hits an all-time low since the 20th century.
Well, it's obviously a lose-lose, but it seems to me it may be more than just a big deal, right? I mean, we're talking about the possibility of a global war with China, which seems like the scariest thing I can possibly imagine.
No doubt. When I think of the kind of world I want for my children and maybe someday grandchildren, I think what's going to shape that in large part is the relationship between the United States and China, because we're the two largest economies, the two largest powers. I want peace with China, but my study of history, and as someone who's focused on national security for many years, is that the best path to achieve that is for America to be strong. When we're strong, we deter aggression. That deterrence failed in Ukraine, and that's why we saw Putin's invasion. And if it fails in Taiwan, the consequences could be even worse for Americans, in my view.
Wow. All right. So I'm thoroughly sick to my stomach thinking about this, but it's really important, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Bradley Bowman, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.